My first question is, how can trauma, loss, heartache, those things cause mistyping?
It depends on the type of trauma, whether it's a discrete event or it's chronic. Usually people are referencing something chronic when they say they have trauma, but I do look at it differently. And what the trauma is, based on the Enneagram type, will have a stronger or more minimal imprint. So, for example, a lot of times the more sensitive types will have trauma be more overwhelming than the gut types that are more, push it away. Like I remember doing conflict resolution with people throughout my career, and I would think, wow, that wouldn't even upset me. That wouldn't be traumatic for me. But it's traumatic for this person. But why? And I wanted to find out why. So actually, I was adding to that research when I was in high school. But a traumatic event creates a deep sadness, not just a normal sadness, a prevailing sadness that permeates everything. And it distorts our ability to have free emotion and experiences. And this can even be things like a natural disaster. People think, well, I just saw what happened when that young man was killed. And so even if we're watching on TV or on the internet, we're still impacted by things. And some people who have the higher empathy strand in terms of our DNA, they've recognized it's that childhood sensitivity, they consider empathy now when they're looking at it, just as the warrior gene they talk about is children that can persevere regardless. So you can have both, though. But someone who has the long empathy strand and the long warrior strand are kind of confusing to people because we think it should be one or the other. But having said that, those that are impacted more are often identified with their vulnerabilities and feel in some way inadequate, that they feel so troubled by a trauma that wouldn't bother, let's say, an 8 and some 3s and some 7s. But we have a different defense strategy. We're going to push it out. We're not going to create an identity around it. But if we're a 6 or a 2, where hysteria is part of our defense strategy to diffuse what feels overwhelming emotionally and mentally, we're going to feel it more. And they're more inclined to create their identity of being a victim from whatever they suffered from. And the 6, for example, is meant to see how they were harmed, to avoid it in the future. So they're more preoccupied with it. But it's all in an effort to not have to experience it again. Whereas the gut types, it's just denial. Yep, not going to think about that. And so we're not going to do that. And yet the same event might impact us very differently. Now, the more extreme the event, we're going to either become totally avoidant and just not be able to cope, or we're going to become aggressive or defensive. So that's why it helps to know what the trauma was and then how it does or doesn't agree with the instinctual type and stacking and the tritype stacking. So it is the 3 types coming together, because if you have 2, 6, and 9, those types together create someone who's sensitive, focused on others, wanting to do things, to feel valued, versus like your tri-type, the 3, 7, 8, who's going to find a way to overcome and to still succeed in spite of circumstances. But it doesn't mean you aren't traumatized, or like that I'm not traumatized. It's just, how are we going to manage it? We're just going to do more. So the 3, 7, and 8 just do more to not deal with it. And the 9 is just going to bury it. And the 1 is going to try and figure it out and do what they should to move through it. So that is meaningful by type, but any kind of loss affects us in the same way. It's just to the degree. So if we lost a check, we're going to be, oh, where's that check? And we're going to be preoccupied with it until we find that check. And we're going to first like, oh no, where's that check? I need to deposit it. Well, did I lose it? And we're going to be going through emotions, and then we're going to be angry. Well, why didn't I put that where I should have? Or who took it? There's going to be some sort of anger. And then eventually we're going to get to, yeah, that just happens. Everybody makes mistakes. I'll just, put a stop payment on the check. But that very same process in a more extreme way is what happens with losing a loved one or a breakup. It doesn't have to be, it could be a friendship. You can be heartbroken losing a close friend due to a misunderstanding. That can be just as painful as some people losing, a marriage or a parent or a child. And yes, the years it takes to integrate it. I'm not saying, deny it, but to integrate it does take longer in certain categories, like the loss of a child takes the longest to integrate. In fact, you never really do because it's out of order. But when I was talking about the natural disasters, we weren't meant to, biologically deal with the level of disasters we can now see going on to the internet. We see traumatic things all over the world, wars, upsetting things. And some people are just more sensitive to that. And it's very hard for us to realize we shouldn't be seeing that level. And if we were living it in person, we'd start shutting down. So empathy shutdown is a really important factor that people don't understand. Like if you and I were in a conflict and we were mad about something, we would shut down our empathy and tell each other what we thought. And maybe we wouldn't really mean that, but in that moment of frustration, because we couldn't. If we didn't shut down our empathy, we'd be feeling the pain that we were causing the other person, and we wouldn't prevail, or we'd never be able to fight to protect our family if our empathy was fully online. So what happens with trauma is we can shut down our empathy to not feel like that again, and then unwittingly identify with being the victim and being angry with the person who victimized us, and then not realize that we're then victimizing the person who victimized us. So we have to open that empathy up again, which is very hard to do in each type, depending on the person, but universally with heartache, loss, and trauma is we could have physical sensations. But most of us, when we're immersed in sadness, there's a soft, diffuse look to the face. There's a tendency to look down. In NLP, it's going into the emotions, or we're going into the internal dialogue where we're trying to make sense of it, but we're not focused on the people around us. We're internally focused at the least. And at the worst, when we're really suffering, we just can't move beyond that. And so everything feels exhausting. We could have physical symptoms like our sixes, and some of our self-pres will start having panic attacks or symptoms like that. Some will go into the full physical expression of it, and others might just, have, the kind of the tendency to try and self-nurture by doing something. Some will be beside themselves or up and away and not in their body, so they don't have to feel the pain. But some people actually can have the dizziness, headaches, nausea. I mean, we're very complex creatures, and that's why we need to understand how each person experienced the trauma. But here we go. The more important thing to be able to integrate that is to discover the individual's identification with each type in their tritype and each type in their instinctual stacking. So, I loved the social, even though it was third for me. I'm positively identified. So even though people tease me because I was opinionated, outspoken, I'd say things, I still just felt it was more fun to be with other kids than not. And on the other hand, the shy person that is like a 259, they don't really have the strong energy to push out what feels overwhelming. So introvert and 259 is the type that is most kind of invisible when they hold themselves back. They can almost become invisible, but at the same time, they can become a target. So that's why bullying, even if it was like what we used to call normal childhood bullying, we handle it differently. Like when I was bullied, when I changed schools, these two girls were mad at me because my first friend in the new school was their friend. They didn't like it. And they told me they were going to beat me up. And I said, oh, okay. Well, do you want to meet at the baseball diamond at 2:35 right after class? How about today? And they would just, yeah, okay, and not show up. But what they didn't know is having an eight father, he said, if anyone wants to bully you or fight with you, just set up a time and they won't show up. I thought, really? Well, then it happened, being the new girl at school. And then what happened is I became kind of the person that helped people being bullied. And that's what eights do a lot, is they find a way to be a protector. And that's where our value comes with. So people would put up with my being outspoken or too direct because they liked that part of me that was looking out for them, or would say what? Wait, don't talk to my friend like that. But what was I going to do about it? So these physical symptoms are more minimal for the average type of bullying or heartache, but losing a friend or someone important is universal. We just might not want to talk about it if we are a type sensitive. And the reason for that is that all of us can have emotional hijacking. So even the most defended person can be ignoring the extreme pain and be actually having fun, and then something goes by, a car that was the same model as our parent and they love that car, and then pain breaks through and then we're lost in that again. And so it's universal. A broken heart is so painful. But on the other hand, a broken heart is an open heart. We're surprisingly open to new information. And so this class emerged because so many people said, but what is it we can do based on our Enneagram type? And as I said, it's the collective. It's the combination of our dominant instinct, our dominant type, and how they work together, and center. So a lot of times just teaching about, if you lead with a heart type, you're going to need affirmation to heal. Like affirmation is third for me. My 4 is in third position. So what I need instead of the affirmation is just acceptance for the way I am. And that will be true of all gut types, that just allowing me to be is the most important thing. I don't need to have you do things for me, although that might be nice. More than anything, I just need to be left alone. And self-pres can feel that way. Whereas social, unless they're antisocial, they want people to kind of notice them, support them, come together on their behalf. And the self-pres, they just want to have their resources around them and know they don't have to worry about them, and they will recover it at their own rate, more like the gut types. Because one thing a lot of people don't realize is that when Naranjo created the instinctual subtypes, he called them subtypes because they were subtypes of Echazo's instinctual types. And the confusion is people just thought that was still subtypes. But Achaza was not looking at the primitive form, he was looking at the ego type. And in 1972, he named them all, and that's when fixations were added. The fixations were not a part of the original Enneagram. He used passions and vices and virtues because that was kind of universal language with different philosophers. And Chazo really loved integral theory, and he really liked trialectics, and his version of trialectics is very, very powerful. And he built the Enneagram thereafter. And when he met Naranjo thought, yes, there are these three, and Achazo called them conservation for like what we'd call gut types, and he called it relation, what we would call heart types, and adaptation for head types. And they went through changes. There were a couple names that changed within there, but the most commonly those three. And Naranjo thought it was fantastic, and then brought the people to Arica, Chile, and studied with Achazo. And then they parted ways in 1971. Arica was formed for the people who went through the full 10-month training, and Naranjo started teaching in Berkeley, and they added. And what Naranjo noticed is that there was just a more primitive version of each ego type. So he hypothesized that if you took the three centers, which he changed to head, heart, and gut to honor Chazo's copyrighted terms, and he called it the Enneagram instead of proto-analysis, but it's the same thing. You know, the ultimate study or original analysis of all the details, thus proto-analysis. But by changing the terms, it's confused all of us studying. But if we understand that Chazo was identifying the mental question that we wanted answered by center, using more Naranjo's triad by Chazo's term, then that will be our first line of defense. And that was in total agreement with Gurdjieff. But kind of after that, the way the Enneagram is used is very different. But once we added in these sub variations of each type, he thought, well, if I take the head type, and the more primitive version would be social, like where do I fit in? How do I fit in? Rather than what role you need to have, like on the ego level. And of course, the head type needs to focus on what they need to know or learn to survive. And then the gut type became self-pres is the more primitive version. And it was based on the need to know how your body is doing. To survive, my body must be okay. So the focus, rather than being on what you need to know or learn, is what you need to remember, where things are, how you feel. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Do you need shade? And that's thus the preoccupation with the body. And then the sexual is the primitive version of the heart type. And it's not like the role you need to have to be valued, but it's who you need to attract. What identity do you need to be safe, to attract the person that will look out for you no matter what? So rather than having a group orientation, or we can be anti to any of these, or like the social, or a kind of a visceral orientation, like the self-pres, the sexual or intimate instinct is about twinship. Who's that person that gets me and I get them, and we're going to do it together, you and me against the world, versus the social, which, hey, we all need to come together. We're stronger together. And the self-pres, well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to make sure I've got what I need in the way of resources. And maybe this cave is better. So knowing that is important, those three categories. What center you lead with, what your stacking is for your types, and your instincts is monumental. So if you know your subtype, they're predictable problems. So I found that I work with people by helping them understand those three. And then our expectations expand because when we're in grief, we lock down, we shut down. And the only way to open it up is to just see who we are and to give meaning to our suffering. So that's where 4 teaches us a lot by addressing it. And 7 teaches us how to reframe it in a way that's more reasonable. And that reframing can keep changing. You don't just say, oh, it's fine. It's a silver lining, but you can start with little reframing. And each type adds something very valuable that we can take from the other types. So that's pretty much what the course was about, if that makes sense, was what each type brings and how we can use it in our healing process and helping others, actually. If we look at what each type is preoccupied with, then we can see where we're going to get fixated and the passion's going to give us overreactive emotions. And actually, I should back up a little and say that the idealized image is critical to accurately type because our idealized images, if threatened, are how we get fearful and then defensive. So our idealized image, our core fears, and our defense strategy as determined by Naranjo. Why is that important? Because those idealized images, if threatened, make our core fears rise up and we go to chaos or panic. And then our gut comes in and does something, some sort of defense to restore a sense of equilibrium. So some people might say, like, for example, with the 3 has a fantasy image in their idealized set of images. And so if I tell you, yeah, you're not a good baseball player, and maybe you really, your whole life tried to be a good baseball player, and someone just tells you the thing that you thought you're not, well, like, how would you know? There's immediate defense. But if we're a little kid and that happens, we go, well, I'll just try harder. So the 3 gets busy with the task of getting better or leaving baseball and finding something where they can excel. So that's a strategy a 3 uses where another type said, yeah, I don't want to bother with that. I'd rather do something where it's easier or it's more competitive. It'd be different for each of us. So with that fear, the defense strategy is going to help us. Now, I have these at katherinefauvre.com. I've actually put a lot of excerpts from my last book, which is the Enneagram Instinctual Subtypes 2.0, where I took all the research from really my entire career coming in with other systems, putting them together, and qualitative research studies that began in 1994 and what was true years later. So first I just put it all in there, and then I thought, okay, after 10 years, this is true or not true. But I met Naranjo after I had done 2 years of research. And because of his background as a personality researcher when it was a new field, he had a scholarship, or Harvard award to Guggenheim. He went to Ohio State where they were doing all the really progressive research, and Michigan. And then he, as I said, went to Berkeley and all around this area because he made Berkeley his home. So he was at Stanford Couples Institute, you name it. He was doing there, but also observational research, like a lot of what Karen Horney came up with. And we all use that, moving towards, away, or against. A lot of people saw in the Enneagram types. Like, I immediately saw that because Karen Horney was kind of big in the 60s because when they were saying that women had, envied being and wanted to be a man, and she said, hey, men want to have a womb and be able to create too. And she normalized it as equal. So we all kind of read that, and that was that same teacher my senior year. Oh yeah, we're all a mess. That makes sense. We're equally a mess. We're equally great, but different. So those of us that knew Karen Horney's work, when we started looking at the description of the Enneagram types, we thought, yeah, we could see which one. We don't completely agree, but most of us agreed on the aggressive types and the more compliant types and the more withdrawn types, resignation. So there are a lot of terms that work, but that's because Naranjo deliberately used every triad that he'd ever learned on personality and put them in. People don't realize that either. Echazo had this mental preoccupation. I think Echazo was a social nine, and why he was focused on the mental part, because the social nine, social is what? The primitive version of the head type. That's why our social nines are more intellectual than the other nines. But anyhow, when you understand that, you then know why the idealized image become our out of control passions that we must have. We must have those images. Someone said I wasn't protective, I'd be, say what? Because I think, how are you defining protective? Because I would feel like I'd stand up for anybody, even at my own risk. But someone might say, well, no, protective is being tenderhearted and saying sympathetic things. And I go, well, that's not how I see protective. So the benefit is I could then learn more about what others would deem protective, where I was just going in my own 8 lens. Then those core fears become compulsively focused on, in a way, what can go wrong, because all of us worry about that. But the 6 is the most preoccupied with that because the 6 is the center of the head center. But the out of control fixations come from our core fears. And so we're trying desperately to think, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to believe? What do I need to do to make it safe again? And then the defense strategy that Naranjo added to the passions and fixations, I call the convictions. He validated my research in 1996, which was great. And he actually asked me to share my findings during that intensive in 96 in Boulder, Colorado. So he added what he knew or he hypothesized, but since my research validated his hypothesis, and he felt like I'd found all the combinations. He only knew some of them, but actually he knew a lot. But 5s are reticent to declare something, where 8s are very opinionated. Well, I see it like this because all the people did this. They had this micro expression, and then this was the tone to their voice, and just liked it. And he said that he wouldn't teach the subtypes because he didn't know enough. I'm saying, what? But you started introducing them in 1971. He said, yes, but I haven't worked through all 27 archetypes, is what he called them. But then when he saw and I had researched by that time, like, I can never remember, it was 22 or 2,500, but it was a lot of people. And that meant 3-hour interviews with people and follow-up interviews and all my testing instruments. And if you've taken my test at Enneagram tritypetest.com, the very first part of that was given to everybody. And then that's how I happened to notice that, wait, I told people to rank all 9 types. They didn't know what they were based on the idealized image and the core fear, because I hadn't added the defense strategies yet. And I'll be darned if people didn't have a type from each center. So even the 6 and 9 that tend to identify with another type, because the 3, 6, 9 kind of become invisible to the people that have those types. And even to us to a degree, because they're so adaptable. The 3 we see the most. And that's because you guys know that you want to achieve, you want to execute, you want to produce. So it's easier for you to at least know your 3. But I have found that 3s have just as much trouble finding their other 2 types in their tritype. Whereas the 6 and 9, they have trouble with their lead type. getting that, it'll usually be in their mix. And that's why I created that test, because I needed something that would alert people. They wouldn't have to have a session with me to find out they use patterns of 6 or 9.